this is actually, we broke down what the Greek word meant and all that. But what happened was I went into some things in my personal story, and I try to guard this oftentimes because definitely blessed with like it was a pretty sensational moment in my life. And I don't want that to be placed to where it's so sensational. That wasn't even the point. Afterwards, I'm like, you know what? I totally almost blew out what I was trying to get across because it was a pretty sensational portion of my testimony. So I just want to bring back some of those things just to kind of let you know the reason why I shared it was because God speaks to us in relationship-wise. So that's why I brought out my conversation with Melissa. Who remembers? So I'm not going to have time to go into it all again. 3 of you? Okay, this is wonderful. All right, so what we have is I'm talking to Melissa, and then later on in that service, when with Kim Clement and the different things that was dealing on, this is a progressive thing, obviously, where God was nailing me and getting my attention, but it is not always that sensational. It doesn't have to be, but he speaks to us in that way in our everyday life and common ways as well. I hope I made that clear. So I'm just trying to cut through this here. I was going to share even, I don't know if I should be streaming this part or not, because some of these things I'm going to maybe give you some examples of more recent times. You're going to think I'm a little bit crazy, but so be it. Also, we're pretty excited that you can be praying about because tomorrow I have a meeting with the chief of police for Edwardsville as we are taking our juvenile diversion program to the next level. We've been serving Madison County now for over 5 years, and it's been hosted here. I'm so proud of it. Definitely a successful outreach to our city and answer to a need, and now it's going to the next level. And so we get to meet with the leaders of Madison County and the juvenile division of Madison County and go before. Just pray about it. It's going to be tomorrow. Just thank you for praying for me as we sit with that. That's all I'll say about that. All right. Back to, that was a little segue there. I should have talked about that during the announcements, but where was I? Speaking everyday life just like that. I'm going to give an example of a story that there is a certain couple told me about that's just recently happened. And I will definitely, just because I didn't ask their permission, I will keep names concealed so that way, they can get permission later and then maybe. So, but this certain couple, they were driving, I think it was away from church. I don't know on what night it was. But the conversation began to arise about a need for getting tires on the vehicle. Now, nobody in here likes to pay for your tires, right? Nobody likes to, it's a hassle, but it's a necessity. And unfortunately, they have to be, from time to time, changed. Well, just like with any family, it's not something that you really budget for all the time, and no one loves to spend their extra saved up money on tires. Can I hear an amen? Well, in the process of this conversation on not really wanting to do it, the tire actually blew. Or not blew, but flat, I don't know, however you want to say it, in the midst of this conversation. So as we're just talking, just saying, hey, you know what? This is what we just addressed on God speaking to us. Now this is a combination of Sunday and Wednesday. So please, I'm going all over the place. Just try to stay with me here tonight. So I'm just giving this example because there's so many times God's speaking to us that we don't always recognize it, myself included. It's a conversation I have with God on a regular basis. I'll be like, God, come on, If you're speaking to me, can you be a little bit, I don't know what your testimony's like, but I can tell you mine. I'm not the fastest one on getting things. You can ask my wife. I'm not necessarily good on hints. I'm not the fastest guy to get a hold of things. And God obviously knows that, but I'm always like, if you could do something to help me recognize it until after the fact, that would be great. So something as regular as a conversation with the tires of a vehicle need to be changed, not knowing that the tire was getting ready to need to literally be changed in that moment. But so often we'll come and we'll rise to this where it's our conversation. And I don't know, I just think that's neat. One thing I do like about it, though, and I don't want to complain too much about this guy because you know my heart, right? We all have those moments. But it does help me feel a little bit better when I think, God, I was hearing your voice. That's kind of cool. You know, God, do you think you can supernaturally change the tire? Or can you supernaturally, that'd be even cooler. But I'm always I am very happy when it's after the fact. Now, I've had conversations like, God, if you could help me out. And a lot of times lately, you know, my testimonies on frustration, I think I could write a book on it, you know, but I'll be frustrated. I'm like, God, could you speak to me about a little bit more important things? That would be great. That would be great because a lot of times he speaks to me on things that I think are so unimportant. A lot of times he will speak to me. He'll speak to me about things. I'm going to make sure. Let me do it. All right, they're not here. They're not here tonight. I gotta be careful. You can tell I'm totally going by my notes tonight. But there was a couple specifically just this past week that ministering to, and God just started showing me some things. And I didn't share it with them because it would sound like I was manipulating them. And I'm not even going to go into, let me not even go into that story. Okay. All right. Let me think of another one here. I mean, I don't always say everything, but there are plenty of times I'm saying, God, please say something, and I don't feel like anything's being said. Do you understand what I'm saying there? There was this, you know my heart for the prophetic. I love the prophetic. I yearn to walk in it at a greater level. And this was just recently as well. There was someone that was over here, was in the prayer line. And this particular person I began to pray for. Now, you know, Dixon will always talk about these open visions and how he goes. And you're just like, I don't know if you guys got to see him when he was on TBN, interviewed by Sid Roth or not. But if you didn't, it's actually on our media channel. If you want to go to our media channel on YouTube, you can find out. It's pretty incredible. But he's just, for anybody that's in the ministry, if you listen to Dixon or hang around Dixon, you're like, oh, God, come on, this is not fair. You know, I've been in the car with a guy while he's on the cell phone praying for somebody and goes into an open vision and, like, reads their mail. And I'm just sitting there biting my tongue, grumbling, complaining, totally in the spirit, going, God, what's up with this? Can you share the love around here, you know? So I was over here. This is recent. And although I know this person, they've been coming to the church for a long period of time, they had moved over the past couple of years. I've not been to where they live. And all of a sudden, I'm praying for this person. And my heart's desire a lot of times maybe is in that frustrated state. I'm like, God, come on, give me something. Or God, you know, what is it? How do you see them? What is it you want to say that's encouraging to them? In this particular case, it wasn't like that. And the ones that seem to be my favorites just start unfolding, and it's not something that you're in that moment stressed out about trying to get something, if that makes sense. So we're over here, and all of a sudden, I begin to see the building. I begin to describe the building, and I said, is this where you live? And they said, yes. Now, in that moment, like, I'm happier than she is. You know what I mean? In that moment, I'm happier than she is. And then now once I got that out of the way, that I just wasn't seeing something or, you know, way off, then there was other things that began to happen. I began to describe some things. God began to share some things about, like, specific things on what to do and, like, purpose and direction for, you know, the things. It was just one of those moments. It was just one of those beautiful moments that I live for. But it's not always so sensational like when I shared with my testimony. The common things. Let me give you one that I said seems kind of crazy. All right, I don't like country music. Matter of fact, if you do, I think you can come to the Sozo as well this weekend. I mean, dear Lord, I can think of another irritating style. But anyways, it's just not my favorite, It's that whiny stuff, I'm sorry, I'm getting some glares here tonight, but it's just not my favorite. So I'm sitting, this is in church, and all of a sudden, it's just one of those famous songs that you kind of know, even if you don't like country music. And a lot of times, if I have something rolling around like that, like I know I don't like country music, and if all of a sudden I hear this song, this has been happening often lately. It'll be a song that rolls, and it's not a Christian song, and I don't even really know the words, so I go to look up the words. God, what is this? What is it you're singing? Well, in this particular instance, it's the Charlie Daniels band, okay? All right, God bless Charlie Daniel and his band, all right? But it's just, don't tell him that I don't like him if you ever see him. So I like him, but not the music. All right, anyways. So all of a sudden, that song, Devil Goes Down to Georgia, right? Now, here I am. I'm in church, sitting on the row. And it's in those moments I'm realizing, now this is so weird. I know this is not my own imagination. I know this ain't something I'm making up. And I don't even know the words to the song. Do you guys know the words? Shame on you. I'm telling you right now. That's it. I'm going to pull out the hell sermon once again. I didn't even know the words, so you go look up. Well, for those of you like me that are novices with it, there's two versions of the song. There's the earlier version that he originally wrote, and then the nicer version where they took out the cussing. I don't know which one was rolling through my spirit, but okay. So as I'm reading the words of the song, there is a portion of me that likes it, right? Because in the song, he whips the devil and says, "You son of a gun," he whipped his tail, and I was like, okay, I'll reach and I'll stretch for anything, So I'm like, that's right, God, we're going to whip his tail. That's right. This is like, So then just throughout, this was days later, I'm in one of my favorite spots called Uncle Lenny's. I'm doing a lot of commercials here tonight. Uncle Lenny's, and all of a sudden they have in this poster Charlie Daniels Band's coming to Pontoon Beach. I'm like, that's weird. All right, that's weird. All right, I don't even know. It might even be on Sunday. So if I'm not preaching here on Sunday, it's because I'm going to listening. The devil went down. No. No, you better be at church. Don't go listen to Charlie Daniels. If you better be here at church. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to tell you. I'm trying to show you. It's not always sensational, but it's called a relationship on God is speaking to us, and sometimes on the weirdest things. So let me try to just bring some type of interpretation to this because this hasn't all played out. I'm still happy with God telling me we're just going to whip the devil's tail, and I'm going to let him know you thought you were good, but we're going to whoop you. I'm happy with that, all right? But even though I don't like the music, and even though I don't even know the schedule, if I told you my schedule just of this week, I don't even know if I'm going to try to make some time, if I can slip over there and see. I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know in my mind, am I supposed to meet somebody there? Do I need to pray for somebody there? You understand what I'm saying? All I know is I'm sitting here, that's weird, I don't like the music, it's going through my mind or my heart, whatever you want to say with that. Then I'm at a restaurant and I see that they're coming to the town in which we live, and I'm thinking, okay, God, what is it you want me to do? Okay? So I still don't know, but I better not see you there, all right? Unless you're there, no, just joking, obviously. I really don't think, I don't know his music. Can't be that bad as long as he plays the revised version. Are you bearing with me here tonight? All right. In 1 Kings chapter 19, this is what I want to say, because last time I kind of described, I can go on, but it can be crazy, it can be weird. I don't want to bore you. But when you're dealing with walking with God in the relationship scenario, it's not always that sensational as much as we would like it. We'd all love the burning bush. I'd love to ride in chariots of fire any given day. But here we find Elijah caught up in a moment. He knows what it's like. He knows what it's like to be in the midst of the incredible in his ministry. We're talking Elijah. I don't need to go into all the details for you to understand. The supernatural surrounded his life and his ministry. In this particular instance, he's not doing the greatest. Matter of fact, you could say he's depressed, he's upset. He's literally running away from Jezebel in this moment. He's just won over hundreds of prophets of Baal, called fire down from heaven. Amazing man of God. But in this portion of 1 Kings chapter 19, you find him at this juniper tree, upset, complaining. He's even asking to die. I mean, that's a bad day. That's where we find him. So he falls asleep. He had been running for his life. He falls asleep under the juniper tree. Then an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And there he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals and a cruse of water at his head. How awesome is that? Eating angel food. It actually allowed him, sustained him, and strengthened him for the journey he was getting ready to go on. So he went for 40 days and nights into this mountain. As he comes to this mountain, in this cave, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, "What doest thou here, Elijah?" So God speaks to him right away with this question, "Elijah, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. Why are you in this place?" There's a lot to that, but we're going to move on. He begins to give God his answers of the reasons why he's so upset. And in verse 11, it said, "Go forth, stand upon the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice." This shows you in a ministry as a prophet of God that his ministry was surrounded by the supernatural. Obviously, this again was a supernatural moment. But the way that God was speaking to him wasn't so supernatural. Not in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the strong winds, but in the still small voice. What we're going to find in our relationship and our walk with God, it's in that stillness, it's in that place that we find that he speaks to us the most. Here we find Elijah waits for God after experiencing all the incredible before his eyes. It's in the still small voice. One thing that I find pretty amazing about this, even though he was not at the right place, even though he was running not after God, but away from his call, God still sustained him. That's the mercy and the grace of God. There was, in this testimony this week, of somebody that was very nervous. They were pretty upset, going through some really bad physical conditions in the hospital, really concerned of dying. It actually got moments where they were very, very close to stepping into eternity. But in these moments of fear, they looked, and not realizing there was this white robe, and it wasn't the doctor's coat or the nurse's thing. You begin to see there was a white robe, and then they felt this hand grab a hold of their hand, and they just drifted off into sleep and woke up and came to, and everything was fine. I think this is the beauty of how God takes us through places. He sustains us with his mercy and grace. Maybe you don't always see the white robe. Maybe you don't always feel, maybe there's those times that you feel like you're alone, but in spite of your feelings, knowing that you're not alone. And even though Elijah is running in the wrong direction, God supernaturally sustains him by the baking of, so everybody like Pastor Cindy that loves desserts, you got to be excited that there are desserts in heaven. If angels know how to bake a cake, come on, somebody. He literally covers his face. I'm not going to go into all this. This stuff that I like, but it's Wednesday night, and we're running out of time. But I love going into a lot of the details, the covering of his face, what that means in that day. So that's Elijah and the supernatural experience, but yet it's in the still small voice. It's that voice that is even familiar to us. If we're not careful, we're mistaking it as our own thought. It's like Samuel, right, who heard this familiar voice for the first time. Samuel, who is being raised in church, literally, is hearing God's voice, and to him it sounded like the priest Eli. You'll find in 1 Samuel chapter 3. And he first mistakens the voice for Eli, who was kind of like a dad to him. He was the priest, and he was the one serving in the temple, in the tabernacle. And so here God is speaking to him for the first time. And again, the expressions and the language of God throughout Scripture helps us to see that we cannot confine that he speaks to us one way. He'll speak to you through a song. He'll speak to you through billboards that you're driving by. Have you ever had someone you haven't talked to in a long time pop into your mind or to your heart, and all of a sudden you get a phone call, and there it is. It's that person you were thinking about, or maybe a Facebook message of somebody that comes across your, your news feed, and you're just like, that's incredible. And if you're not careful, you're like, wow, that's cool. Coincidence, deja vu. No, it's none of that. It's actually you're being sensitive and you're picking up something in your spirit of, I need to pray for that person, or God's bringing that person across my path. And it's these type of things that sometimes, if we're not careful, we totally miss it or bypass it as a thought of coincidence, of whatever the case may be. But the reality is, we hear God's voice more than we realize, better than we think we do. And so in this, we find Samuel is hearing God's voice, mistaking the voice for Eli. And as he goes, we understand, finding out, Eli says, what are you doing? Don't bother me. I'm sleeping. Go back to bed. Not once, not twice, 3 times, So I love this too, because in God's mercy and his grace, even if we miss it, even when we miss it, if I show up at the Charlie's Daniel place and God says, what are you doing here? God? If I get beat up in a mosh pit at a country concert, it's called the mercy of God. Greg, what are you doing here? That was just, you're crazy. I didn't even put that song in your, no, I'm sorry. But the mercy of God is, even if you miss it, isn't it beautiful that God called his name out again? Samuel. Yes. Finally, even a backslidden priest said, that's God speaking to you. And here's the beauty of it. What was the instruction that Eli told Samuel? Go back and say, thy servant is what? Listening. Oh my gosh. And this is the greatest key. Isn't how much we're crying out to God, please speak to me, God, speak to me. God, why aren't you speaking to me? But the key is not even in that desire, but the key is in our listening. Then we find out it's not so much that God's not speaking, it's that we're not listening. God loves to speak to his children, his sheep. And it happens in the listening. Listening. Not that you listened, not that you answered the altar call and you've done it. It's a continual relationship of listening. And just in this physical world that we live in, that we know each other's voice by the time that we spend with them. If my wife called me and had to say, "This is Melissa, your wife," that'd be pretty bad. Although, no, I do have a story. No, I'm just joking. But by the time that we spend, we begin to recognize this is God speaking. And he'll do it through, when I was sharing my testimony before with Kim, I'm having the conversation with Melissa. God begins to repeat my conversation through this word. Now faith is arising within inside of me. I didn't tell you all the story of it, just because it was Wednesday at the time, but man, I like, as much as I went through in that moment of my life, I was a crazy man. I was a couple hours back, I blew through the chair. I'm doing this. The only thing I could describe of it would be like a war dance. I don't know. It was crazy. It was crazy. But I'll tell you, faith arose in my heart to the point that I would say, it's on. I'm jumping again, and I'm going to do, I'm going to get up to answer the call again. Faith arises when we hear his voice. And one thing about Samuel was there's more than one situation. You'll find it in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and chapter 3, where it says that Samuel ministered before the Lord. Such a priceless description of getting to know God's voice, even if you're missing it, is Samuel was ministering before the Lord. Is it possible to minister to him when you don't even recognize his voice? Yes, it is. There's more than one way to minister to him. In Samuel's case, it was really doing what Eli's sons should have been doing. It was doing what Eli should have been doing. It was serving. Serving ministers unto God. Our worship, we know, ministers unto God. The things that bring him pleasure is our love. When we love, it ministers unto God. So as we spend time ministering unto the Lord, it's in that process of ministering unto the Lord that you're going to hear his voice. Even in the inception of our spiritual walk with God, we took credit like it was our thought or our decision to surrender our heart to Jesus. To walk down the aisle and say, God, forgive me of my sins. Come into my life and come into my heart. I need you. It wasn't our own thought, even though it might have sounded like it, because maybe we were arguing with ourselves or we were arguing with God before we finally decided to surrender. But even in that moment, it was God that was knocking on the door of our hearts. For those that would hear the knocking. Oh, this is good. I knew it would take a minute. It's a rough start, I know. But as he's knocking on the door of the heart. Now, this description in Revelations that I'm just going into isn't to the person that is trying to answer an altar call or a person that's on the edge of a bar stool. This was a letter written to the church. So, he's still knocking on the door of hearts of the people that go to church. And he says, for those that would hear my knocking. And his knocking comes in different shapes, fashions, and forms. But just as Samuel walked into a prophetic relationship with God by the fact of saying, your servant is listening, that Jesus says, I am knocking. And the one that will hear says, I will come in and I will sup with him. Huh? God, we just thank you. This is our heart's desire, is that fellowship to increase, that relationship to increase. Not of our begging to get you to speak, but of our listening to recognize, to hear when you do. As the worship team comes, Lord, we thank you. We thank you for our sensitivity of being able to be still, even in the midst of the fire, the earthquake, and the wind breaking. That we're able to listen and hear that still small voice that is much louder than anything else in our life. That we would continue to know your voice, even in the ordinary things, in the ordinary ways, in the familiar sounds. We thank you for being a God who wants to speak, who wants to talk, and who wants to hear. Something else about that moment that I said I wasn't going to go into too much with Elijah. Elijah was pretty honest and truthful with God in that moment. Elijah knew how to complain. And I'm not encouraging you to complain to God, but I am encouraging you to be honest with God and to be truthful. Now this becomes like Moses would say, a face-to-face. I'm not trying to act, hide behind a bush. This is how I feel, God. And I know my feelings can be wrong. This is how I feel. And I love it in the honesty of Elijah's emotions that were wrong. We know through his arguments, he wasn't the only one not to bow his knee to the Baal. But at least he's being honest and truthful with God. And not so much of, this is what we find of us knowing God, but in the process of God knowing us and our honesty. Everybody's standing tonight. Lord, we thank you for recognizing the sensitivity of knowing and spending time with you. Lord, that we would be incredible servants and ministers, that we spend our days ministering unto you. In Jesus' name.